It's a good title, The Human March Towards All-Round Liberation, All-Round Emancipation. It's a very good title. I would also like to add to that title, The Great Universe. And I'll tell you by the end of the presentation why I think that also should be in the title. Okay. So for the first time in known history, humanity stands before a collective awakening. It's a birth of incredible danger because the forces that seek to prevent the flowering of humanity stand arraigned, a wall of opposition against those of us who have just snapped out of slumber and are beginning to find our bearings. In this David and Goliath struggle, humanity has little by way of worldly cannons and firepower. The dandelion breaks through the toughest concrete with a force from the depths of life itself. In the same way, humanity, and each individual member of it, has a mighty weapon, a mighty strength, a force that is part and parcel of our momentum to the stars. Already, today, individuals and groups of people are learning to tame this sling of immense power, and so they should, because if it is ripped from their hands, it'll be a long, long time before humanity can recommence its journey to the stars. Chapter 1. Victory to the expanded mind. The human being is a strange creature. At first, he or she strolls carefree on green lawns, and any prodding or nudging to think of setting aside mental energy for something more lasting is met with ridicule, irritation, and hostility. He is happy to care for himself and his small family and leave it at that. But life has a way of ruffling that lawn, that green lawn. Those storms, those quakes are outside the control of humans, and with bruised egos, they have to address the powers they sense must be behind the cycles of nature and the regular arrival of calamities in their lives. In this dance of creation and destruction, they have to dance or perish. Dance with all, dance without exception. Your mind and your body simply has to move. If it takes gentle encouragement or firm beatings, dance it must. The result is that the mind grows in, and to enjoy tranquility, the human mind must expand in all directions without any limitations. Barriers of narrowness must be worn down and destroyed, and this is why the human being, following his nature, familiarizes himself with people everywhere, and ultimately expand his vision to the greatest entity. The struggle to overcome attachments and fears related to a certain land or location and the officials or agents thereof goes on. Dogmas and superstitions need to be identified and analyzed, especially if media tells you they're scientific, they are there by proper authority, supported by all, and not to be questioned. You simply have to take their word for it. And if you study things a little deeper to gain a properly informed opinion, you are labeled an anti-such and such and censored from the public square. The struggle to overcome geosentiments is done by study. Study to gain rationality, the rationalistic mentality, where one carefully weighs pros and cons before saying yes or no to something. Instead of just rushing ahead and accepting something on the basis of emotional manipulation or scientific sounding word salads. There are no shortcuts, and a single overlooked, swallowed, and ingested, or in this case injected, superstition can waylay the traveler for a very long time and even kill him or her. Human beings must deliberately smash all geosentiments, for they would otherwise thwart humans and keep them shackled to a pillar where greatness dies. So it is a human want to expand in all directions. It's a force of not just nature, but supernature, because not even the physical universe is without limit. This innate drive in the human being to find the greatest entity is as natural as a river finding its way to the sea. Attempting to dam this unstoppable force only results in huge suffering, floods, and destruction, whereafter the water continues anyway to its desired destination. The fleeting mountain-topped vision of the great etches an indelible memory in the heart of the human being, and again he returns for sustenance. This heart pilgrimage, or devotion as practice, becomes a priority, hence the efforts of the conscious person to fight against factors that stand as towering obstacles on this path. Chapter 2: Victory to Struggling Humanity. It must not be forgotten that each and every one is dependent on others. We are dependent on humans, animals, plants, in fact the whole animate and inanimate world. Humans are naturally gregarious and normally suffer if they have to endure forced isolation. In terms of their evolutionary origins, they have risen from social animals and naturally form clans. They band together in social groups based on shared sentiment. The majority of these are based on sentimentalized stories, motivations lost in history, and adhered to as a matter of tradition. This social sentiment in humans is a weakness that is ripe for manipulation by vested interests. Those malevolent forces want to control humanity, decimate humanity, and take control of the property that used to belong to humanity. We fight against the shackles of dogmas, the onslaught of irrational sentiments dividing humanity, and outright selfishness and evil in the form of criminal malfeasance within officialdom and crimes by a small global elite against humanity. Witness the frantic dance of evil. The super-rich feel that even if they are not God himself, they are rich and powerful enough to do God's work. Drunk with power, they feel they can decide who lives and who dies, and by drinking the blood of youth, they themselves will never die. People who may have seemed to be herded like sheep are human beings, and they must awaken. By their nature, they will awaken. The last few decades, they have actually started to awaken, not just to injustice, but also to the deeper part of themselves, to the self. Yoga clubs, mushrooming, people are seeking psychological remedies instead of pills. Meditation becomes a real practice, not just a fad. The concept of quality of life is taking on a new meaning as people realize that psycho-spiritual welfare, in contrast to physical welfare, is simply not possible to have alone. If some people on the other side of the planet are subject to ethnic cleansing and organ harvesting, how is my psycho-spiritual welfare possible? It is not, until everyone comes along. One has to understand that people want to remain in this world because of attraction. People who feel attracted to and inspired by something in the world normally live long lives. If nothing remains that attracts in the life of people, life loses its charm and becomes empty of meaning. When one experiences being held and nurtured by something greater and subjective to oneself, one feels a special kind of meaning, a meaning that is always there, based on truth, in the sense of being unchangeable. It is not based on one's utility value that comes and goes on a minute-by-minute basis. The most attractive entity in the world for someone is that entity, which manages to touch the innermost, verifying the self. To that entity, I sing, "When you leave, I cry in pain. You return, I smile again. You are my life's essential meaning. You are my world, my everything." Devotion is different from emotion. Emotion is subject to many attachments and aversions and can easily be manipulated by people around us, media, etc. Emotion makes us slaves and devotion makes us free, because in devotion we purposefully select the innermost within, that reflection of the great within our hearts, to move towards. Emotion makes us behave as if hypnotized, thinking we are animals, not human beings. Devotion makes us whole and able to express our full human potential as free people. It is the most precious aspect of human life. The global technocracy is in the business of cementing its control of humanity, but to do that they have to somehow cancel this devotion. For devotion feeds the roots of psycho-spirituality, their greatest threat. The chosen ground upon which we fight and slay the cabal is the principle of social equality. We fight by awakening humanity, making the collective mind of humanity vibrate with the collective zeitgeist of proto-psychospirituality. What is proto-psychospirituality? It is a newly instigated, growing and varied expression of psychospirituality in the collective mind. It starts in the dynamic expression of the psyche in areas such as art, free speech, revealing the truth, removing falsehoods, reviving local culture, revitalizing the local language, music, the sidelining of pseudo-culture, and so much more. And it moves to the transcendent level of pure being, which of course is the birthright of all. If the aspiring neo-humanists have had time and scope to practice the watering of one's heart in peace, making it an oasis with devotion, now that is not enough. Now it is time for a more actional stance. The job at hand is to work tirelessly for social equality against all strategies of dividing humanity. The urgent present-day task is to awaken the collective mind of humanity with truth bombs and make it vibrate with a growing and multifaceted expression of proto-psychospirituality. Devotion is there, in essence, like a subterranean river of joy in the midst of struggle. Beware of gifts from the global technocracy. Examination of their jabs have revealed not just terribly destructive spike proteins, but also graphene oxide, a known biocidal, that may be behind the appearance of electromagnetic fields in the bodies of recipients. Do they think we are robots? Rudolf Steiner in his day forecast that humans would cancel spirituality with vaccines. We may be there now, so do not be a victim. Humanity will have to realize the collective kinship of all, and the innate sense of coming together in clans or groups has to be expanded from socio-sentiment minimitis to socio-sentiment maximitis and beyond. We will have to awaken this great sentiment of togetherness in those who realize that they elevated one group over another, that they mistakenly followed false prophets of strife and groupism. And what about those whose ego is too hurt, too proud to walk with humanity? They too will have to be encouraged that although darkness is nice, light is even nicer. Realization of the plight of humanity, engagement with the solution to the problems of humanity, and the jettisoning of any superiority or inferiority complex versus the rest of humanity is a necessary initiation. It's not enough that an individual moves ahead. All must come along. The same respect is given to both high and low. Everybody moves within that magic flow. Now we know that all are one forevermore. No one is a stranger to you anymore. Chapter 3. Victory beyond all limitations. Ordinary humanism is not the goal. It lacks a perennial source of inspiration and is relying on wokeness and political correctness dictated by the powers that be. The goal lies further ahead. The difference between sentiment and devotion is that sentiment is not consciously aimed at the great, and it gets entangled in geosentiment, socio-sentiment, and ordinary humanism. We human beings enjoy the eclipse of unit and cosmic. At the start of the eclipse, the I exists, and the great comes into view. At full eclipse, the great has captured the little I in its orbit and given it conscience. Finally, after the eclipse, only one entity exists in blissful self-awareness. What about animals and plants? Have they no rights? Utility values aside, have they no existential value? Do they too not enjoy this eclipse of the great and the small? Advanced animals have started to feel the pull of the great. That is why they are advanced. Some primitive animals and plants can be divided, and both the two parts continue to live. More evolved plants and animals cannot survive after being split in half. Is this not a sign that the eclipse has started between the great and the small in these creatures, in these evolving creatures? All of creation, including faraway nebula, constellations, has conspired to create the exact circumstances for us to create heaven on earth. if you could reach out and touch the fiber of this creation, you will get the visceral experience of bliss. This is why the sages say the world comes from bliss. It is bliss and returns to bliss. If even the smallest part of it is maltreated, the equilibrium of this creation is disturbed. Oh, human being, you are just a point of perception, weaving colorful threads in a hall of mirrors. Raise your consciousness to the greatest entity reflected in that self of yours. The calm ribbons between you and that entity will make your mind both strong, wise, and compassionate. By this, you will gain a deeper understanding of human nature to understand who is friend and who is foe, what is lasting and what is ephemeral. Merge your own existential nucleus with the existential nucleus of the great, and you will gain the capacity to send a positive message for all time to all of creation. In the kingdom of the light, beyond the darkest night, this dawn I will glorify. To everyone I send my loving call, my friend. To everyone I send my loving call. The blue sky above is studded with stars. The air is moist with the fragrance of flowers. One with all I am, with every grain of sand, drenched by sweetly scented rainfall. To everyone I send my loving call. This fragrant earth under my feet is purer than gold could ever be. In its verdant groves, every creature grows. Blessed with life, she dances with us all. To everyone I send my loving call. In this way, neo-humanism in all its glory will be established, and the global technocracy with its transhumanism will be relegated to the not unimportant role of antagonist in humanity's greatest and most educational drama. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Peter. It was especially moving to feel your expression through the song. I hope that everybody could also share that experience, but I felt moved, through these words of the powerful song. It was very somehow poetic presentation, and here there are no questions yet, although we have question and answer session. But how would you put it now, aside from your presentation? How would you put it, like in a synthetic thought? What is this main opposition of neo-humanism versus transhumanism?
Yeah, I would put it like this. I said in the beginning that we should add the great universe to the name of the title. And I noticed a parallel. In the beginning, the mind has to gain rationality. You have to think clearly, you have to analyze things, you have to develop something which in relation to Krishna is called viprapati. It means you have to analyze things and act accordingly. Okay. And then at a later stage, You have to forget who used to be your family, who used to be your enemy. You have to forget that. And you have to fight for ideology and unite moralists. Just like Arjuna had to forget that he had family on the other side. He had to simply go with the moralists. So in the same way, we have what is called aprapati. We have the same thing. We have to forget who was our family, who was our enemy, who was our friend. Now we have to join hands with all the moralists. And that is the sentiment of aprapati, just like it happened during Krishna's time. And finally, we have prapati. It means surrender to the great entity. We have to do that because, as we have noted, we are really up against it. And we do need the help of the great entity. And ultimately, although we previously have been thinking, oh, we have to do this, we have to do that, and then we have had advice from the great entity, oh, do like this, do like that. And finally, we have to throw up our hands and surrender. This is exactly the parallel to the Mahabharata. So that today we have the Mahavishwa, the great universe.
Wow. Yes. It's amazing to see these parallels. Can you give a little bit more background about that Mahabharata, the great battle, for those participants who don't know so much about it?
Well, the concept of prapati is the concept of surrender. That concept was invented by philosophers after Krishna, I don't know, 1,000 years after Krishna or something like this. But if you analyze Krishna, you notice that he supported surrender. The concept of everything being fully done by the Supreme Entity. We may think we do things, but actually everything is done by the Supreme Entity. And in the final reckoning, we have to simply surrender to that. So he was, in his actions, supporter of the idea of prapati. But along with prapati comes viprapati, which is the reverse of prapati. And viprapati is the logical mind. We have to analyze the pros and cons of everything. And we have to think a million times before we do something. And when we do something, we have to think a million times before we say something. And before we say something, we have to be ready to actually do it. This is called viprapati. And then comes aprapati. That is when the Supreme Entity says, okay, do like this, do like that, this is good, this is bad, this is the consequence of this is the consequence of that. With my help, you can do all these things. The Supreme Entity guides, and so we can do a lot of things with his help. That's aprapati. And finally, we come to the point and say, okay, don't worry about anything. Just surrender to me. I'll take care of everything. That's a full prapati. That was Krishna's expression at the battlefield with Arjuna. And we have exactly the same situation today. And if you look around, you may find Krishna here now. It's a momentous time in human history, and Of course, we have to struggle, but by surrendering to Him, we will be victorious.
So can this, what you just said, be related, because you used the word ideology before, like the people who are ideological? Because this term has also been so much misinterpreted and misused. Can you define it for us in this context? Ideology.
Which term?
What is
ideology? Ideology, well, it's been described as if you elevate your mind to go beyond relativity, and then you return to the world of relativity, the whisperings of messages from that state, they are called ideas. And what is based on those ideas is called ideology. So ideology means, it doesn't mean just to intellectually think of how can we do this and that. You have to go within yourself, receive that message, and then write it down or whatever. That's ideology. So it's not, say, communist ideology. This is not ideology. It's not, doesn't come from that.
Yeah, Baba say ideology is neo-humanism ideology, because any other thing is not. And I also like there's a book that discourse on Mahabharata that says that Baba came from Mahavishya. That means the great universe. So that we are in that era. We are. Our practice is to make us, the people of the great universe. The contributor of the great universe, because he came for that, and that's why he gave his ideology is the ideology, not capitalism, not communism. They are, you can call it pseudo ideology. The real ideology is ideology of the truth, and Ananda ideology is the truth. So that's what ideology is.
There's when you speak about improving society, increasing more justice in the world, increasing more equality of opportunity, all those things, we have to realize that the understanding of a deeper human nature and actually the pursuing of the great humanity, deeper spirituality within ourselves, is just as important as the foundation of a house. You cannot build a house without foundation. It will fall down. So neo-humanism is very concise in this message. If you talk about proud, you say, okay, proud, you have decentralized economy, you have this and that. But when you talk about neo-humanism, you speak about the base upon which you can build that proud or whatever. So this is why neo-humanism is very, very special. It's a very special gift. So everyone should try to get hold of the original writings about neo-humanism by P.R. Sarkar. And we should try to... there's another point I wanted to say also. There is something in this world called Overton window. What are you allowed to talk about? And when you talk about proto-psycho-spirituality, in the psychic sphere, you're allowed to talk about certain things. For example, you're allowed to talk about small misdemeanors in officialdom, like some politician has takes a bribe or something like this. It's normal. You can talk about that. When you're not allowed to talk about it's far outside the Overton window to talk about how the politicians are doing depopulation. That's not permitted inside this window. But that Overton window is actually moving rapidly today towards people are allowed to talk about the depopulation issue. And we as neo-humanists, we as moralists, we should try to expand this Overton window towards not just that, but also towards the positive alternative. We should be allowed to talk freely and openly and encouragingly about the holistic side of human life. You know, devotion, for example. It's a little bit of a dirty word, but we should make it acceptable in that window. We should actively move that Overton window in a direction that creates a real revolution of spirit, not just a revolution of chopping a few heads and then continuing the same way. So this is part of the proto-psycho-spirituality, to move the psyche in a way that creates an actual progress revolution, an actual holistic revolution.
So can you tell a few words of possible, like any practices that can be done to foster this neo-humanistic outlook in ourselves?
Obviously, meditation is very important. Dada touched on that earlier in yesterday's talk. Meditation is extremely important. It has to be a regular feature of one's life, because the mind, without encouragement, the mind will go down. It's like a hot air balloon. If you don't have the hot air blasting into the balloon, it will go down. You have to blast the hot air into the balloon to go up. The same thing with the mind. You have to repeat the mantra. You have to have a practice. So don't delay. Learn a practice and practice meditation to raise your level of consciousness. That's very, very important for a neo-humanist. And also, like I said in this presentation, like you can read in neo-humanism, learn to think. Take your time. There's no hurry. Think carefully before you accept if something is good or bad. It's called rationalistic mentality. And what you can do in the world, it's important to understand that the concept of proto-psycho-spirituality, it is to do with collective psychology. It's not to do with individual psychology. We can get together and create a change in the collective psychology. That's proto-psycho-spirituality. And the whole world will be benefited.
So, Peter, I think the time has come that we thank you for your deep insights and encouraging words.
Thank you.
We have made a decision that there should be like few minutes break between the presenters so that people can go and take the water. And if there are some more questions that can be put here. Yeah, there is more like a comment from Chandrika from Holland. She says, if you talk about transhumanism and service to society, how do you recognize? Wait a second. How do you recognize transhumans? No connection with real love, or like?
Yes, I think several speakers have touched on it. It's like transhumanism is to do with replacing or enhancing human capabilities by technical means. Unfortunately, that comes often with a denial of the innate possibilities of improving our capabilities through spiritual practice. But if that transhumanism accepts, okay, you can also improve yourself by sadhana and special types of learning and all that, it becomes less evil. But I think 9 times out of 10, people into transhumanism, they think, human beings have to go 100% that way, and don't worry about the human potential. There is no potential in sadhana. That is denied. by most transhumanists. So it becomes a natural, contentious discussion. That's what I think. But there are technologies we have to use. I'm using technology now. We use technology now all the time. So technology is inherently not bad. It's a tool. But the people who becomes devoted to that tool, that goes a little bit too far. You should be devoted here, not to this tool and that tool.